Welcome to RIVE, Reflections in Veterinary Education. And it's time for our next episode where Eric, I think we're doing a topic, right?
I think it's Catherine's topic.
We are doing a
Oh, it's
topic, but
Catherine's
it's
topic. Okay, well, we're doing a topic and it's not me.
which is
So
again why I should not have been late. But there you go.
oh, take it away, Catherine.
Maybe I should
What's
try
our
not
plan
to
for today?
prepare for these, and then I will actually be on time. Yeah, thanks. So, Happy New Year, everybody. Glad that
Happy New
everybody
Year.
is here with us. So tonight I wanted to tackle a topic that's I don't know, maybe a bit controversial, depending on how you want to look at it. For those of you who are out in the ether that maybe aren't in academia, um, the curriculum is generally under the purview of the faculty, right? So there's this saying in academia that is the faculty own the curriculum. And I am curious about A, why that is, and B, whether that is actually the best thing for a curriculum and the students who are then going through that curriculum. So before I put any of my thoughts out there, would one of you like to chime in on that?
Go for it, Eric.
Yeah, I don't think that I really realized that until I got to where I am now. So the institutions where I was before, I suspect that was the case, but it was never so extremely clear to me as it is here, where I'm like, oh, hey, maybe we should do X thing. And it's like, yeah, you got to get whatever, 150 people on board to do X thing. And I'm like, huh, okay. Um, so yeah, I think that there might be some institutional variation, even if that is true, like how much control the faculty members have over it, that there may be gradations there, even if it's like technically true. So that's the first thought that I have on that. And then, in terms of do I think it's good or bad, since again, I didn't really experience that until getting here. So far, my experience with it being very strongly faculty driven is not highly positive. Um, but I do think that there is something to be said for distributed decision making and the the faculty being an important stakeholder in that, but maybe not having all the decision making power.
Yeah. Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is like I've heard that phrase and I've heard it from like faculty members that the faculty own the curriculum. And first thing that comes to mind, one, what does that mean? And two, is that true? Kind of like what you're saying, Eric. Like, is that real? And I tend to fall on the same side as what Eric was saying. Like, I think there is something good about having lots of buy-in, and if the faculty are primarily the ones delivering the curriculum, it's probably important that it's something they believe in and they're supportive of. Do they own it? One, I don't know if we do, and own it, what that implies, right? Like nobody else can tell, like only the faculty can have any say in this and nobody else can tell us what to do. And I'm just not convinced that that's true. Like I don't know that that's written anywhere, even the places where I've heard people say it, like really, like in the sense of ownership, like what does that really mean? And so like does administration, students, other stakeholders really not have any say in this? And I don't know, is a good thing, because the shared governance is a murky thing, and I think there's a lot of room for like, well, there's this committee and then this oversight and then this, and then it makes it sort of unclear who does sort of own. Why would you want to own a curriculum anyway? But uh, so I think it's just really unclear, virtually everywhere I've been, what that even means, and
Yeah.
if it's real.
Yeah, so I've actually been consulting. Part of the reason that this came up is because there are about 10 proposed new veterinary programs within North America that are supposed to come online within the next couple of years. And I've consulted with a couple of them to help them build their curriculum, and sort of this popped into my head as I was doing that, like, well, what is this idea? Because I remember being at Virginia, Maryland, and it like being very clear that the faculty owned the curriculum. And so as I was helping with some of that and helping with some of the accreditation documents, I actually did read it in the standards for the COE accreditation policies. So in standard 9 curriculum, it states in the second paragraph, the curriculum in veterinary medicine is the purview of the faculty of each college, but must be managed centrally based upon the mission and resources of the college. And so I think that is must, I shouldn't say must. I suspect that's where this idea that the faculty owns the curriculum comes from, because it's an interpretation of what the COE Accreditation Standard 9 says. I would say that I don't think Standard 9 says that the faculty owns the curriculum. I think that Standard 9 says that the faculty, as Bobby mentioned, should definitely have a say in the curriculum, and as Eric mentioned, should have a say in the curriculum in that shared governance model, but that there needs to be some other entity or entities that sort of collaborate to make a curriculum. I think this could be a really interesting sort of, I don't know, research project or foray into sort of how different programs have interpreted that particular standard. Because at Virginia, Maryland, for example, my experience there was very much that like the administration was hands off, the faculty owned the curriculum, the faculty were the ones who put forth the information, and they were the ones who sat on the curriculum board, and they were the ones who made the decisions, all decisions regarding the curriculum, which to me seemed really weird, because it was like, well, then why do you need an academic affairs person? Why do you need an academic dean at all, right? If that's the case. And I think part of my frustration with that whole situation is that I think in many ways faculty are very much like students. They don't know what they don't know, and they don't know what they need to know when it comes to curriculum, right? When it comes to teaching and delivering. And that's not to say that's true of all faculty, just like that's not true of all students. There are pockets of us out there who have a better understanding of sort of what needs to be done and how it should be looked at. But and I'm picking on Virginia, Maryland, because that was the most intimate experience I think I had with curriculum. But when I looked at what had happened with the curriculum prior to me arriving there, I think there were some really good intentions, and I think there were some really good things that came out of that curriculum revision, but it was gone about in a way that literally left people with PTSD. And like, I mean, when I got there and was talking to people about the curriculum, I mean, there was just like this huge divide between the people who were there during that process that stayed afterwards, and they were like, this was the most horrible experience. We were basically told this was what was going to happen, even though the curriculum's supposed to be ours. We didn't really feel like we had a say, and the deciding vote was cast by someone that shouldn't have been able to make that decision. It was a 51-49, and it was like this whole like weird situation that I kind of walked into and had no idea. And again, I think that there were good intentions all around, but I think that it was gone about in a way that was an us versus them rather than a let's collaboratively come together and look at the research and let the research help us sort of guide the processes that we're going to go through, because there are actually really good resources out there that can help guide you through a curriculum review and revision. So yeah, it was a really frustrating thing, but I'm interested in your perspective, particularly Bobby, because I know one of the things that I started when I was there was to start that curriculum review and revision assessment process, and you were there to continue that. And so I would be curious sort of what your perspective is on that and how you feel like that's taken shape.
Yeah, I think it's a tricky thing, because that phrase, the faculty own the curriculum, often comes up from faculty who are trying to like express frustration about how things have happened, right? That's definitely where I've heard that, like, somebody wants to push back because their perception is administration is trying to do something, blah blah blah, and they're like, well, the faculty own the curriculum. That's often the circumstance. Otherwise, people aren't walking around saying that on a day-to-day basis, right? Just want to remind everybody, faculty own the curriculum. So it's pushing back somehow. And one thing I've definitely learned in the process of our current wrapping up curriculum review and revision, and putting forth a proposal for what we recommend for improvements, is that there's a lot of I've been really pleased with actually a lot of the engagement we've had with a large portion of the faculty. But there's also, a sizable portion of the faculty who has not been engaged with the process. And I fully expect a portion of those faculty to come, pitchforks out and like, this is terrible, this is being rammed down our throats. And it's like, this has been a 2-year process that we've been like reaching out over and over and over again. And I suspect that there will be some of those that are like, the faculty own the curriculum. Like, yeah, well, this group is made up of faculty. And so, this is very much attempted to be, as collaborative and transparent of a process as possible. But there's already, I mean, like at the end of 2 years, when we're making our recommendations, we've had a lot of support from the faculty and people who are like, okay, yeah, we're really excited about this. And then there's people who are like, I don't even know why we're doing this. The curriculum's fine,
Yeah.
And it's like, well, here's all the things that we've said and the feedback we've gotten from different people and whatnot. So there's always going to be some folks who are, we know, resistant to change no matter what. And then folks that just, like to drag their feet and some of that. So I think some of the faculty own the curriculum resistance is just, this is the thing I feel like I can fall back on. Having said that, this process has given me a different perspective, not just in, the curriculum review, and that process has, I've learned a ton through that, but also just like in how to work with people, because the one thing that's really important, right, is if we go through, the idea is for this to ultimately go for a vote, our proposed changes to the faculty after it goes through a review process from the Office of Academic Affairs and the curriculum committee, so those smaller groups, but that ultimately go through the faculty. And I think, that is really important, because if a sizable majority of the faculty are not on board, it's just not going to work, right? Like, you can have the best laid plans, and if people decide for whatever reason, rightly or wrongly, that they don't like it, it's going to be really hard to get by it. And so, and I think in that regard, if the faculty do kind of own the curriculum, because they're the ones delivering the curriculum. And if you have a bunch of people who are like, I don't want to do this, like, whew, that's going to make it really, really hard to deliver something. And so, in the spirit of the concept, there is some truth to that, whether it's written down or not, right? Because who's delivering this curriculum? It's not one administrator, right? And so you can have the best ideas, and it can be driven by all the best research, but if you can't sell it, if you can't get buy-in, it may not matter. And so that's kind of the balance that we've been trying to find, which is getting people, excited about, like, hey, these are things we can make that are improvements that you have told us you've been frustrated with. Here are the things we want to make better, and here's how we envision doing that, while also acknowledging that this is going to take time, this is going to take work, this is going to take effort on everyone. This isn't, change is not going to just happen and be easy, but also trying to bring people along and get their input. But it's really hard. This is a huge organization, right? Any vet school is a huge deal. And to get 150, however many faculty we're talking about, all swimming in the same direction is, right there, impossible. But if we can get the majority of them, that would be pretty great.
Something that you mentioned, Bobby, that made me think is there is an obligation for the faculty to engage. Like you can't, if you're involved in a teaching in a curriculum, there is no you don't vote option. Like, there is no you don't participate. Like, it's like owning a pet. Like, I have an obligation. I don't just get the cuddles, I gotta feed, I gotta scoop the litter, I gotta do all this stuff. Because my initial reaction to that was like, oh, okay, fine, those who don't participate, they don't get to complain. But the more you were talking, the more I was thinking about it, I'm like, no, they not only do they not get to complain, they have to be involved. Like, this is your job. You are being paid as a faculty member to engage with the curriculum. And so not engaging is not an option. But in academia, that's not how we roll, right? The degree of autonomy is massive, and you can decide to do whatever you want as a faculty member.
Yeah, and I think was a lot that I wanted to kind of chime in there with your conversation, Bobby. I think for me too, it's this idea that you can sort of be held back by the whims and whimsies of a few individuals within that faculty that can be so frustrating. And so when I talk about sort of the literal PTSD that I was confronted with when I first joined Virginia, Maryland, it was literally a 51-49 vote, right? Like, that's how it happened. And so it wasn't a majority. It wasn't even close. I mean, it was a majority, right? It was a
majority of the people who voted, but not everybody voted.
Right. But it wasn't even 2/3. Like it wasn't even a good
Mhm.
majority of people. And so the
Mhm.
people who then did participate and did express concerns and frustrations didn't feel like their voices were heard because it was such a slim margin. And literally over and over again, I was told it was a single individual who cast the deciding vote, just one single individual that cast the deciding vote. And so there was that sense of like, well, why do we even bother to engage? Why should we even try? Because clearly, whatever the administration wants to happen is going to happen, and we're going to have to deal with it. And I would say that as a faculty member and then later as an administrator, I agree with you 100%, like both of you, like you have an obligation as a faculty member to engage in all things that relate to what happens in your classroom or your clinic, right? Or your laboratory.
Mhm.
Like when you take a job in an academic institution, that's like that's what you do. Why would you go to an academic institution if you
Right.
are not interested in helping the next generation of
Mhm.
fill in the blank become you, right? But there are so many people who lose sight of that, I think, and it becomes about them. It becomes about what they want and what they think is best and how much they know and why they've been doing this for 30 years and it's always worked this way. And I don't know that this idea that the faculty owns the curriculum is helpful to those individuals, right? Or that it's helpful to other people who really want to kind of evolve the program and maybe move it in a direction. Like changing just for change's sake, I get it. People are going to be frustrated. There's no rhyme or reason to that. But when you are thoughtful about it and you approach it and you provide people plenty of opportunity to say, this is how I feel, this is why I don't think this is great. Um, and then those people choose not to engage and then later come back. It's kind of like voting in the elections in the United States, right? Like you don't really have, I mean, people do it anyway, but you don't really have the right to complain about things if you haven't partaken in the process and put
Yeah.
your vote out there to be known. And I think it's very much the same way with when it comes to curriculum. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I think the other thing is that what I found really interesting when I was there, as I was like Bobby was spearheading, she's the chair of that particular committee, but I was sort of there to help guide and provide, information. And what I found really interesting was how connected the people who came to those meetings that we had in person were to their curriculum that they learned from, right? So we would ask
Oh
questions.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was really fascinating. Like,
Yeah.
well, when I was at MSU, we did it this way, and this really worked out well. Or I went to Auburn, and we thought this was great because it went this way. Or I went to, Texas A&M and we did it this way and it was fantastic. And I think it's really funny because so many of us, when we were going through our curriculum, we're probably complaining like crazy,
Oh.
right? Like, this is the worst. Why are they doing this way? This is awful. And then, as you get into, you have an opportunity to like help build another curriculum or bring insights. It's all about what you went through as a student.
Yeah.
So, um, I don't know,
It's
Eric.
funny. It's funny you say that. I want to add to that real quick, Catherine, because one that wasn't just on that committee. When we had our
Yeah,
larger
yeah,
like town hall meetings, like everybody was
yeah,
like, "Well, when I was at school," and it told me a couple of things. One, people had a lot of positive responses to where they went to school, and also like most of these curricula work pretty well.
right.
Like most, they're all so, all the things we think are so dramatically different. And at the end of the day, like now we are selecting from people who went on and trained and like, they were obviously probably pretty good students. And a lot of what, your students bring to your curriculum is going to have a big impact on how, with what they do. But I was like, yeah, maybe we don't need to stress over every little tiny decision because everybody seems pretty happy with whatever program they went through. Anyway.
Eric, you can,
I that reminds me of I was running a hemoabdomen a week or so ago with my first year resident, and it was going badly, whatever, typical sick
to
hemo
hemo
abdomen. And
abdomen.
he was like, "Oh, should we get some norepi?" I'm like, "No, he just needs volume. I'll get some blood. It'll be fine." And like, and 10 minutes later, I think we should get some norepi going. I'm like, "No, it'll be okay." Another 10 minutes. What do you think about some norepi? I'm like, fine. You want to start some norepi? Start some norepi. It'll solve the pressure problem. And that's not, like,
The number
so,
will be
but it
pretty. You'll feel better.
exactly, you'll feel better. But it reminded me of something that I heard an internist say once, which is don't just do something, stand there. Like in
Right.
I
medicine, we
love that one.
struggle so much with this idea of like, I can do something for this patient. It's like, no, a lot of times you just gotta like wait for things to happen. And
Yeah.
and I
Yep.
think about that with curriculum revision all the time. I'm like, stop meddling. It's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think, one of the things that has gotten, for lack of a more refined phrase, gotten people's panties in a wad when it comes to curriculum is that the COE has said that you will review the curriculum no less than every 7 years, and people think then, oh my gosh, we have to do this whole curriculum review and revision. And in fact, that's not how I would interpret that. I would say you need to assess your curriculum. You need to take stock of what's going well and what's not going well and make some changes, but it doesn't mean you have to throw the old curriculum out the door and start a brand new one. And in fact, if you're doing curriculum revision and design well, you're changing a little bit every single year, right? Like
Yeah.
there are things
Yeah.
that come up that you're like, wow, that really didn't work. We need to fix that. But I think
Yeah.
what's also happened is that it's like, well, we'll just look at it in 7 years because we don't have to look
Hmm.
at it because the COE says we don't have to look at it
Yeah.
every year. We can just look at it every 7 years. But in fact, it should be cyclical and it should be happening on a
All the
semi-annual
time.
ideally basis, and certainly an annual basis. So, but I'm curious, Eric, because you've been at Auburn for quite some time, and I know you've been at a couple of other institutions. So what has your experience been with curriculum revision, implementation, attitudes from faculty about it?
Um, I think that again, my impression is like people just want to fiddle. And a lot of the times people are like, I just want like my impression to be on this thing. And virtually none of it is evidence-based. So the part of the problem is that we're a bunch of amateurs bumbling around trying to figure this thing out. It's like if I put a bunch of yellow belts together, I'm like, figure out how to get to a black belt for me without any guidance from any experts and see what you come up with. Like, I mean, they'll put something together. They'll probably
Yeah.
learn some martial arts, but the fact that we pursue this without experts in curricular design sometimes. So just recently Auburn did their like every 5 years we do like the review the whole curriculum, and we brought in people from main campus who like met with all of the instructors, like looked at the learning objectives, like did it all holistically. And at the end of that, it's like, tweak,
Yeah.
good. You know?
Well, and I think that's my frustration where the hubris of certain faculty members comes in, right? Like, I don't
Yes.
think it's all faculty, but there are certainly a vocal minority of faculty who believe that because they are veterinarians and or because they are experienced and or because they are board certified, therefore they know everything they need to know and nobody can tell them anything. And God forbid that you tell them that they're not doing their education right, right? That they're not doing their teaching right, that they're not approaching it, and that there's actually evidence out there to support there are alternative ways of going about something. And I think that for me is and was one of the most frustrating things was to talk to people and say, listen, like here's the research. This is how you're supposed to start curricular design, right? Like when you're doing an assessment, what is it that you want to be done at the end? Like what is the product you're trying to
Hmm.
move toward? Like what do you want your first day graduates to be able to do and to know off the top of their heads? And then what do they have to do during that year prior to then to be able to do that? And then the year prior to that to be where they are in this year. And like moving that backwards design forward. People always want to begin at the beginning, which seems like the natural place to start, but that is the absolute worst place to start when you're talking about starting with a curriculum. And so that's sort of what happened with the curricular redesign is that it started at the beginning. I think they had an idea of what they wanted at the end, but instead of then designing from what they wanted at the end and then going to the fourth year and then the third year and then the second year and the first year, they're like, this is what we want at the end. Let's start at the first year. And then by the time they got through the first 2 years of the curriculum, they were just exhausted and frustrated and angry with each other. And then the third and fourth years just sort of were like, okay, well, shit, now what do we do? And they just okay, we'll just do this, right? And so that has been a big part of the frustration. And so I think there's a level of hubris that happens that just needs like to be brought down a notch, right? Like listen to the people
Yeah.
who have the training and education and listen to the people who can come in and say on a broad level, listen, there are good ways to go about this and not so good ways to go about this. Let's go about it in a good way. And increasingly, I think one of the things that gives me a lot of hope is, as the three of us are, we have additional training and education. And I'm seeing more and more veterinarians specifically who are pursuing any kind of
Yeah.
training and education. And I think that's going to make a huge difference moving forward. But I think we've come to the table late in recognizing the value of veterinarians trained in education. And I think we've come to the table late in recognizing the value that educationalists can bring to the
Yeah.
table. to the point now where there seems to be a bit of a divide, right? Like, and this is a whole nother conversation, but the educationalists who are not veterinarians feel like they're constantly having to prove that they have something to contribute, even though they're not veterinarians. And the veterinarians who don't have the training and education are constantly trying to prove that they know enough about education that they don't need the educationalists. And so there's this really weird dynamic going on there. Um, but but yeah, I hope, I'm hoping too that with the new schools coming online that may be helpful. Although I will say that many of them are going with the 3-year model, which actually historically has been incredibly unsuccessful in our we have plenty of evidence to show that a 3-year curriculum is probably not the best way to go. So anyway, Bobby, it seemed like you had a comment.
Yeah, no, I keep coming back to this idea of, we have some folks who are, digging their heels in and very resistant to the change. And one thing, when we started the curriculum review revision process, I had in my head, and I actually, you may remember saying this to the group, and I've said it more recently as we've come towards the end, is that the people who have engaged, the faculty who've engaged in the process have been very supportive, right? Like even when they were critical, they were like, okay, well,
Yeah.
what about this? They're asking good questions, poking holes, which is what we want, right? Poke holes in our ideas, try to make everything the best it can. Give us the feedback. What's not working for you? The folks who and I welcome those criticisms and those questions, and we want better clarity. Great, that's all good stuff. The folks who are not engaging and who are later going to try to hold up the process are a really small minority of the faculty. Like I really do believe that, and I think that has borne out in our process so far. I'm determined not to allow their volume to like misrepresent their proportion of the faculty that they are, because I think that the vast majority of the faculty, again, it's a bell curve, right? It's probably going to be, there's a few really vocal people on one end who are like your champions. They're like, yeah, this is the greatest thing ever. We're really excited. And the opposite end, the people who are going to try to drag the feet. Most people are like, yeah, this seems okay. Yeah, we're pretty good with this. And they're going to go along. And I'm determined not to allow that vocal minority to throw a wrench in the whole system and to make it like not the positive process that it's really been. Because I do think, we sent out a survey not long ago, like toward the end of our process, and again, we had, I think, one or two like just kind of crotchety, negative, frustrated, like okay, whatever, and we had a few that were like really, really supportive, and then a lot of just in the middle, really thoughtful, like, hey, we liked this. I have concerns about this, but overall, I'm happy with X, Y, and Z, and just really what you want. And I'm just like, yeah, that's perfect. That's exactly what I want. But I'm not going to allow those few people to sort of sabotage all the good work that we've done. And
Yeah.
I'm just determined just to be like, okay, yeah, okay, you've said your piece, great. All right, let me know when you're done throwing your tantrum, and we're going to all move along, and
Yeah.
not going to allow it to just taint all the good stuff that is actually happening. Because I do think the vast majority of faculty, again, will voice their thoughts and opinions in constructive ways. But it's the small minority that if you let them will really get under your skin. And I'm
Yeah.
just like, well, I'm not going to let them. I'm just
Well,
determined
I
not to
think
let
that's
them.
great. And I actually agree with you on that. I mean, I think, as much as I heard a lot of frustration with the way the original curricular revision, and it was a pretty significant curricular revision at Virginia, Maryland, came through, the fact of the matter is that 90%, 95% of those individuals were still committed to doing right by their students. And so they didn't like what happened. They didn't like how it happened. They were frustrated to the ends of the earth, but they were not going to let that affect them doing the very best they could by their students. And that really, in many ways, gave me a lot of hope too, right? Like, because it is a very vocal, very small minority of individuals that are going to try to sabotage or do whatever it is they want to do. But the vast majority of them were just like, this sucked. We hated it. But listen, we're here to take care of our students and to make sure that our students do the best they can. Now, some of them couldn't let go of the fact, and this is a whole, probably another whole topic, that the NAPLE scores overall on average went down after the new curriculum was implemented. And and to me, that's kind of expected, that there might be a little bit of a dip in the scores. Now they haven't come back up to the previous times, but I could also say overall, nationally, the dip in, NAVLE scores has gone down, number one. Number two, I don't know that it was a statistically significant change. And number three, I'm really annoyed with the fact that you're more worried about NAVLE scores than you are worried about what
Yeah.
you're teaching in the classroom and how your students are learning that. Because in the end, if you're doing right by your students, they're probably going to be okay on the NAVLE,
Yeah.
right? It should not be the end all be all, but it's one of those things that everybody sort of gloms onto and is super proud of. So, yeah, I think it's really interesting how people think about curriculum and how suddenly they all become experts in it when stuff like this is happening and they literally have no idea why they feel the way they feel. So,
So I,
The
oh, go
apparent
ahead.
I don't know, failure, if I would say it's a failure, or roughness with the process is interesting. It most closely equates to me like trying to change patient safety culture,
mm,
where it's like this cannot be a top down process. Like you need people from like technical staff and front desk staff. Like you need all these people like to come together as a grassroots effort, and then you need experts who like understand that culture to be like, this is how we do it and this is how we put this in place, yada yada. And so when I hear of the description of a failure like that, that's kind of where my mind goes, is like things that are just like driven by a single individual, like this is how we're going to do it, like that's how you piss people off. And So I guess I'm surprised to hear that people were that upset, because if we're, the topic is the faculty own the curriculum, so we start from that premise. If that's the premise from which that process was started, like how did it get so bad? And I don't know if I want to delve into like this N of one example, but whenever we're talking about curricular revision and the faculty being involved, like, yeah, you got to have everybody involved in that process.
yeah.
Well, so here's my question, because I don't want to get into
Mm.
that necessarily N of one. But my thought is, there's implied like the faculty owning the curriculum, right, is maybe not the ideal. And are they experts in curricular design and that sort of thing? So I think we've all acknowledged, like, yes, the faculty need to have some say in the curriculum, but if you were going to design a different system, a better system, like what would it look like? Like,
Yeah,
have you
I
thought
think,
about that?
yeah, I haven't thought about that. I think that's a great question. I think what I have sort of take umbrage at is the idea that they own the curriculum, right? Because like you're right, Bobby. Ultimately, they do in a way because they're the ones who are delivering the instructional materials, the content, guiding the students, all those kinds of things. And you would hope that they're all doing it for the right reasons and that they're there for the right things. But when it comes to the sort of nuts and bolts of understanding vertical alignment, understanding horizontal alignment, like when I'm talking to people about curriculum design, one of the things that I remind them is that vertical alignment is actually quite easy to do, right? Because that is a very top-down thing. You look at what's happening here, you go, what's happening here, what's happening here, what's happening here. You just sort of build it up like building blocks. What's really, really difficult is horizontal alignment because faculty don't like to talk to each other about stuff, right? Like I had faculty in my office all the time. They're like, I just don't understand why they didn't learn X and this. And they come to me and I ask them about this and they don't know anything about that. And I'm like, well, have you gone to talk to the instructors who taught that material? Well, no. Okay, well, maybe you should. Because if you're asking students, did you learn this in your last class? They are inevitably going to say no because they think that they're going to get a review or they've forgotten. It's not that they're lying to you on purpose. They truly are having so much thrown at them. There's no way they're going to remember. So the only way for you to legitimately know is to go talk to your fellow faculty members, get copies of their syllabi, share with each other instead of holding it close to your, chest and saying, no, this is mine, you can't see it, and having conversations about, man, this guy really wanted to do norepi. I just don't understand why that was so important to him. Can you help me understand? Was this emphasized in your program? Was like this your go-to thing, right? And and I think for me too, and this is again another reason I think that as I've gotten more mature in my academic career, that I really much better understand why they say, you really shouldn't do your undergraduate, master's degree, doctoral degree, internship, residency, DVM, all the same place, right? Because there's just so much else out there to learn, even in the small area that we're in. So for a prime example for me, when I went through Texas A&M's veterinary program, I have never and will never in my life prescribe sulfa medications to any animal, right? Because I was told you don't use sulfas. Sulfas, you don't use them. They're bad. You don't use them. And I'm obviously lying a little bit, but that's what we were told. Like, you don't use sulfa drugs. And for me, that was fine. Like, I didn't know any better. But then I get to other places and they're like, oh, yeah, we use sulfa for this, we use sulfa for that. And I'm like, I'm sorry, what? You know? And so, even things which seem little, which aren't little, is your medication choices, you know, that comes from where you're trained. And if you don't understand that there are multiple ways to approach every case and still be successful, then it's a problem. So, you know, I think a lot of that comes from sort of this narrow view, because a lot of times people do stay in the same institution, or, you know, they do their internship residency and then they come on faculty. And I understand that it's comfortable. But there needs to be a broadening from our perspectives too, of, okay, you've done your internship here, you've done your residency, we're not going to hire you on faculty. We're going to push you out to somewhere else. And after a year or two, if you still want to come back and we still have that opportunity available for you, we will. But that's exacerbated by the shortage of academicians, right? Because you get a good one, you want to keep them there. But that's not helping them, I don't think, become the best faculty member that they can become either, because not only are they learning a certain way to practice clinical medicine, they're learning a certain way to practice their teaching. And that's not always a good thing. So that's when, like, you go to a vet school and you see that the majority of people have gone to that vet school and they're continuing to stay on the faculty, and you can then begin to understand why things are the way they are. And there's not really a lot of room for pushing people outside their comfort zones. And I think that's where I get frustrated. Then people, well, we own the faculty, or we own the curriculum. It's like, well, yeah, but that doesn't mean you know best, you know?
Yeah.
You don't know.
Well, it's interesting when you say that, because I started to kind of think back anecdotally, right? Like, who has been really supportive of the curricular changes, and a lot of it is folks that have, fairly recently and within the past 5 to 7 years, come from other institutions, or like, oh yeah, that'd be really cool to change it. Like they do. Again, this is anecdotal. I don't have numbers on this, but they do seem like more open to some of the changes versus the people who've been at the same institution for, a couple decades, are like, well, now the difference is some of them are like, well, back when it was this way, and now they've been through a few changes, and so they've got thoughts there. But there, I 100% agree. I'm always counseling students, and I actually one of the students I mentor this year, sort of, I didn't forbid her, but kind of forbade her from like applying to stay for the internship here. I was like, no, you need to get out there. You need to go do other things. I'm always, people have life reasons why they geographically need or want to stay, and so I don't actually say no, I won't consider that, but I strongly encourage interns, all of them, like, try to go somewhere else. It's so much better. I guess I'm wondering though, talking about like the COE requirements, and would it be a worthwhile thing to try to you know make a change to that requirement, to where it's not just in purview, like whatever that word means, that just means like that's a thing we care about, right? Like it doesn't imply any type of authority over the curriculum, but maybe there would be some guidance into, like, there should be consultation from educational experts, or somebody with a curriculum expertise in designing or reviewing the curriculum. Like, that would be really interesting, because again, ultimately the faculty are the ones that have to implement things, so they need to be involved in the process. But it would be interesting to have some. I mean, I think we all know, like, it'd be great to have an outside perspective, not just outside, but like expertise perspective. But is that something that could be prescribed at that higher level? Would it make a difference, I wonder?
I wonder
I
if
don't know.
the where I'm thinking is like Catherine's question, like, okay, well, if not the faculty, then whom? And maybe we could go away from at the end of having a plan and being like, okay, so we're going to do a vote, right? And it's going to be a binding resolution, and that's how we're going to decide whether to do this thing or not. Maybe we need to do it more by consensus,
Yeah.
and just like sit around and be like, okay, like, can we agree on what this? And there might be some people are like, well, no, I don't agree with that. And it's like, okay, well, we're going to agree to disagree because you're in the minority. But in the case of, like, 49% of the faculty feeling very strongly about one thing, it's like, you got to still work, that you have work to do.
Yeah.
And when I hear things like that, what comes to mind for me is that these people are probably not actually resistant. They probably just don't understand. Like I feel like it's a knowledge slash education problem rather than an actual philosophical difference. Maybe it is, but I would like to think that as scientists, if we have compelling evidence, like let's use that.
Yeah.
And are there still going to be some holdouts? Maybe, but
Yeah.
then you can say, well, okay, like you don't do science then, so we're going to ignore you. Be okay with that.
I love
I mean,
it.
I would also like to think that. I will say that as someone who is, I mean, I don't know everything about education. Clearly, there's way too much to know about it. But as someone who has had some of those conversations with people, when I actually do bring up the idea of research and evidence, most of them poo-poo it and say, well, I mean, I've been doing this for 30 years. I know better, right? Um, or they poke holes. I remember I was at a conference recently and I was talking to someone who shall remain nameless that is very well known for some research in the veterinary field. And I was having a conversation about educational research, and specifically explaining that, and please don't misunderstand this. Like I am fully in support of using distance education modalities and things like that and interweaving that. But there's very clear evidence that supports that in-person education and teaching is superior to most of those modalities. Now, granted, things have gotten much better now, and I think we could probably find that the gaps are closing. But I was having that conversation with this individual, and they were basically just like, and this person has no training in education, like has no experience in education in terms of like the actual theoretical, philosophical research basis of it. And was basically like, and this person is a veterinarian, was basically like, well, I mean, that was all based on one study. So of course it's, like that's not relevant. That's not important. And I was like, no, actually, this is based on thousands of studies. And the individual is like, well, yeah, but that was like 20 years. And like just this constant rebuttal with absolutely no basis in any knowledge of it. And that was a pretty like severe instance of that. But I have come across that with others who say to me, well, what do you mean, research? I mean, my research is that I've been in the classroom for 30 years, or I know how to teach. I know what good this is, or I know what good that is. And I find that I just can't have conversations with those individuals because they're not open to the idea that they don't know it all, that they don't know as much as they think they do. And I'm not here to discount your 30 years of experience. I understand that 30 years of experience is really valuable and probably, hopefully, has taught you a lot. But by the same token, you shouldn't discount my experience and my understanding and knowledge of a discipline that you don't have, right? And so, and again, this is the N of one. For many of the people that I spoke to, that was not the case. I think a lot of them some of them were just digging their heels in because, well, 30 years ago we did it this way and it wasn't broken, so why did we fix it, right? Um, and some of it was, I think, very much focused on the fact that they were concerned about NAVLE scores, and some of it was like, I'm just terrified of doing something new, which I think
Yeah.
happens a lot too, right? Like
Yeah.
change is hard. It's
That's
scary.
valid. Yeah.
No, you never know what's really going to happen. So I think there's a lot of that. And I do wish it was more about ignorance, but I think, and I talk about ignorance and intentional ignorance. I do think there was some level of ignorance, but I also think there was quite a bit of intentional ignorance, right? Of this idea that I don't know what I don't know, but I don't care. I'm still going to have an opinion and still going to tell you I'm right.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where the frustration comes in, is like, how do you deal with those people and how do you manage that? And when it's 49% and not all of them
Yeah.
fell into one body
Yeah.
of it, but when you have a conglomerate of those people and 49%, like I can understand why they were frustrated and upset
Yeah.
that this happened in a way that they didn't feel good about,
I think that's the thing, what Eric brought up is like, is it a lack of understanding?
Right.
And I think when you've got, 10, maybe 15% that are like, "Meh," you can be like, okay, you're ignoring, we've
Right.
provided you with really good evidence. The vast majority here have figured it out. They're on board. They get it. But when it's half or nearly half, a third, then you're like, okay, is it one that we haven't considered the other side, and maybe we really need to think about that, or two, is it that we just really haven't explained this very well and they're not clear about what we're going for, and that's really hard. So having spent the last 2 years thinking about the curriculum, and it's amazing how we try to present it, to a large group of faculty in a succinct way. And, some of the ideas are like, okay, they can understand this. And then everybody's looking at it through their own lens, which is, that's the only lens we have, right? And so they're like, okay, well, in my world, how would that work? And I can see a lot of them, they're just like, well, I don't think that would work for this. And then I go, okay, well, let's talk about it, because they'll ask questions and we'll do some one-on-one things. And well, tell me what your situation is. What's your concern? And they're like, well, I don't see how blah, blah, blah. And so I ask them a question. Well, do you do this? They go, yeah. I go, well, you can just do that. And they're like, oh, okay, yeah, that works great. Okay, we're on board. Like it's amazing how often it is just having a hard time. This is what I do right now. This is what I understand. And I'm not sure how to fit this square peg into this round hole. And I go, turns out I can get you a different peg. There, done. It fits, but I've spent 2 years really thinking about all of these different things. And so having those one-on-one conversations really can make a difference. When, and it's not, there's a difference between people being willful, like I'm just, anything you say, I'm going to poke holes in it. I just don't want to do this. And others who are like, oh, I'm starting to freak out now because now I'm not understanding how this sounds like it's going to be a problem with this. And then I go, tell me what the concern is. And they go, well, oh, okay, no. Okay, here, let me see. What if we did it like this? Does this make sense? Yes, that makes sense for me. And so I do think there's a big portion
they
of
just
that.
want to be heard and validated.
Yeah. And that's a big part of it. And again, a lot of these people are trying to figure out I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, this is great, right? If you're sitting here and thinking, how will this apply to me and what will this impact? I go, you are engaging in this process. That is what I want. And I want you to come back with say, but how would this work? Because I don't know about every single course that everybody teaches in this, that. And so if there are some issues that this is going to come up with, I want to know about it now, right? But it's amazing how often I'm like, oh, okay, no. Yeah, this would be like this, but then this would change, and then therefore that wouldn't happen. And they're like, oh, okay, yeah, it's all coming together. And so, but the fact that they're even engaging with that process, I'm like, yes, if you are trying to imagine how you could, teach what you're teaching now in this new format, we're good. Like I'm like, we've got you. This is great. It's the people who don't engage. Those are really the only ones. Like you were saying, Eric. Like I don't know how you get that. Like this is your job. You have to do this. And yet the enforcement side doesn't really ever seem to happen for the folks who just decide not to. But again, I'm determined to just sweep them along with everyone because I do think they are the vocal minority, and they won't really have a choice. If I can get everybody else to be like, okay, yeah, we're seeing this. Then it is 75+% of the faculty who are bought in, and then they'll start to get quieter.
That's partly the culture too, right? Like I mean there are some there at some level you have to be willing to dig in your heels and say, okay, this is going to be a cultural shift, right? So those people who are digging their heels in, I would suspect are the same people who, when I was in my position, would come into my office when it was time to do scheduling for courses and tell me when they were going to teach. And I would look at them and say, that's not how this works. Well, but you don't understand. Your job is to teach from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday if you're in the classroom and laboratory, and sometimes after hours, depending on how things work out on the schedule. You don't get to tell me when you're going to teach between those times. You can tell me if you don't want to teach after 5 p.m. or before 8 a.m. And you can tell me that you don't want to teach on Saturdays and Sundays. But you don't get to tell me that you're only going to teach from 10 a.m. to noon every other Thursday. That's not how this works. And I had to do that with a good 2 handfuls of faculty when I came into the program, and just make it very clear to them that when they came in to ask for that if they tried to go around me, it was going to get back to me and I was still going to say no. And it was just going to be more painful for them. And I think that's part of it too, right? Is like you have those 1 or 2 handfuls of people who think for some reason that they're entitled to special privileges and to have their voice be louder than everybody else's. And if you can find a way to keep their voices from being louder than everybody else's, as you've talked about, Bobby, then at some point either they leave or they fall in line and they just grumble under their breath and they, kind of move on. And hopefully most of them are there because they want to be there and they want to teach, not because they want those special privileges. And I think that's really true of most of them. Again, many of the people that I talked to during that process were frustrated by the process, but were very, very committed to doing the best they possibly could in the new system that they really didn't understand, that they really didn't like, but they were like, listen, I'm here to teach the students. I'm committed to doing the best I can. And so I think that's, that does give me hope. And in that sense, I'm okay with then the faculty owning the curriculum, because if they're going to take it that way, then that's that's the most you can ask for, right? Is
Yeah.
people are pissed and angry, but listen, in the end, my job is to teach the students and prepare the next generation of veterinarians to be as successful as possible. And I'm going to do that however I can within the.
And that's what the faculty want, right? Like nobody shows up every day and says, I'd like to be bad at my job, right? Like even the
No, I
ones
think there are some people who do. I think it's
there
a very
might
small
be,
majority, but I think
I
there are
think
some
it's a
people who do.
teeny tiny. I think they're, again, because they don't want to be like, even if they say, I don't want to do your thing, like I'm gonna,
Yeah.
try to, but they don't want to be bad at their jobs, which is, I think, some of that fear, right? Like,
Yeah.
especially if you have folks who are like, I don't want to be seen to be bad at my job. I don't want to not be success. I don't want to be perceived as not successful. And so that's part of what the change is, right? Like if I'm going to ask you to do something different than what you've been doing successfully for the past 20 or 30 years, right? And now I'm going to ask you to do something different, there's the potential that it won't go well.
Yeah.
And that's not very fun. That's not a great feeling for people. And so if you don't have that sort of growth mindset in your faculty, that willingness to try something different and change and grow, I think there's a reason for pushback, because I don't think people want to be bad. They don't want to show up
I
and
don't think in
be
general.
unsuccessful.
No, no. I
No.
do. I think the
Yeah.
only other thing that concerns me about this idea that the curriculum is under the purview of the faculty is um, the staff that get left out of that process as well, right? So in doing some consultation with a couple of these new programs, there have been some discussions about like staffing and things like that, and I've just asked them like, it looks like you want to hire licensed veterinary technicians, registered veterinary technicians, right? Credentialed veterinary technicians. Why can't you make that a faculty position, right?
Mhm.
Does your institution have a way of allowing somebody who has potentially quote unquote only, right, an associate's degree, but is a credentialed licensed person, medical professional, to be a
Mhm.
faculty member? Because I think what happens a lot of times is that our staff gets left out of those processes, and they're
Mhm.
really on the front lines, particularly with those technical skills. They're really on the front lines of teaching these students the technical skills, right? You don't want me teaching students how to do a lot of the technical things that those technicians do. That's not my job. I'm not generally very good at a lot of those things. That's why I have technicians, because they're really, really good at it, right? But because they're not faculty, and they're often staff, and they aren't sort of elevated in the same way, they don't get the same respect, I think, a lot of times from students or faculty. They don't have their voices heard, and I think they would have really good insights into things that maybe faculty don't see, right, that
Mhm.
faculty don't
Yeah.
really think about. And so I think it's a little bit exclusionary too, which is concerning
Yeah.
to like the
It's a
faculty
really good
and the
point. Yeah, every university, every college is going to be different, but like we have LVTs at Virginia, Maryland who are faculty. They are
Mhm.
professor of practice, is
Yep.
the term that we use, and I would venture to guess that most universities have some type of faculty line that would work well or align for that.
Yeah, at
You
Lincoln
can get creative.
Memorial.
I
Yeah, at
think
Lincoln
people could
Memorial,
well.
they did not. They would not
Yeah,
allow licensed veterinary technicians to have faculty roles because
that's
of the
fascinating.
way the charter of the university, I think, was set up. But I
Wow.
mean, there has to be a way to amend that or make,
I was going to say,
right?
yeah, there's a way around it, because I
Um,
know it's not just at the vet school at Virginia Tech. There are professors of practice, like people who
or
are in their field. They've been working in their field for 20 years, blah blah blah, and they come back. Yeah, that maybe you don't have a PhD in this, but like
right.
you have the credentials of having done this for a couple decades. So that's definitely something Virginia Tech has. And again,
Yeah.
it's not unique to the vet school, but it has. We have technicians who are who are in the
Yep.
professor line, who are faculty, and yeah, so it is
What about,
certainly possible in some ways.
yeah.
Again, every school is going to be different, but I would venture to guess there's probably ways that it can be done. Just if there's a will, right? If people want to make it happen, I guarantee there's a way to make the changes
About
to have
it,
it happen.
Auburn and Midwestern, because I know those are those the only, you've been at other programs, you've been at Georgia
Yeah,
and
UGA and
yeah.
yeah. Yeah, the most of the faculty positions with which I'm familiar require a terminal degree.
Yeah.
So, whatever that is for your discipline. Like in arts, that's like an MFA,
Yeah.
for some. So,
Yeah.
when you were talking about culture and the question that you asked me earlier, Catherine, about like how do things differ between the institutions, I think that really is a lot of what it gets down to is the rules are this, but what is the culture?
Yeah.
You know, and I think that the difference that I appreciate here at Auburn is that the administration feels that they can't go to the faculty and say, let's do this. Like that it really needs to come from the faculty for any sort of change. And that's different than at Midwestern and in Georgia. At Midwestern, no one had any idea what they were doing, you know, so it was all like we were just bumping into walls for the most part. So there was no like culture or structure. And then at Georgia, it was I felt a partnership. Like admin would talk to the faculty would talk to the admin, you know, and like it would be iterative and
That's cool.
I thought relatively supportive and healthy.
Well, that's good.
So yeah, the culture, like the story that you told Catherine about like the faculty being like, this is what I'm going to teach. I'm like, what? Like,
Oh,
but
yeah.
that is a culture thing, you know, like
Yeah.
if that's what
Mhm.
they've been doing for 20 years because
Yeah.
no one's told them that's not how we roll. Like, yeah, I mean, they're just going to keep doing what they've been doing.
Yeah. I wish I was making that up, but no, I
No, I
can
believe it.
tell you
I mean,
honestly that I
I
was
can see
not.
those people. And then, you know, Bobby, I think you said something about you know, you go to these faculty who have been doing this for a long time successfully, and they're like, well, why do I have to change? And I would challenge the use of the word successful.
Yeah.
Just because
I
you
think
were
I
in
use
the
quotes.
classroom talking at them didn't mean
Yeah.
that you resulted in them becoming a good
Hmm.
veterinarian.
Yeah.
Well, and I would also say that what do you mean you don't have to change? That like one of the few constants in life is change, right? Are you still teaching the same material that you taught 30 years ago? Because if
Yes.
so,
Yes. Yes.
that's also a problem, right? So if you're not teaching the same material, which you shouldn't be 30 years ago that you're teaching now, then you probably shouldn't be teaching the same way that you're teaching now either.
Yeah.
It doesn't have
Well,
to
if
be a
you're
major
treating your
change.
patients the same way you were
Right?
30 years
Yeah.
ago.
I mean, like 30 years ago,
Mhm.
nothing died without a good dose of steroids. Well, that's not always true right now. You know, like
Yeah.
there are things that have evolved for good reason. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, and I think, yeah, what's your definition of success is always a really good question because not only what is your definition, but really what role did you like actually play in that individual
It's
becoming
like, wait, I got promoted. I got tenure.
right?
That's it,
Like,
right?
and honestly, 10 to 20% of our students are going to be successful in spite of us, right? No matter what we do to them in the
Maybe
classroom,
more.
lab, clinic, they're going to be successful because they're just driven. They've figured it out. They're smart. They have this growth mindset. They're going to do it. 10 to 20% of our students are going to struggle no matter what we do in the classroom and how great of an instructor we are. It's just the way the world works. That middle 80-ish percent, 60 to 80-ish percent, I mean, could be on the cusp, right? And that's where we really need to focus our efforts. And if you're not focusing your efforts on those individuals, and in fact, I think a lot of people focus their efforts on that top 10 or 20%, which is not where it should be focused. Then yeah, what is your definition of success? Because if your definition of success is just connecting yourself to 10 to 20% of the students who are going to be successful no matter what you did, then I would argue that you're not really that successful, right? So having that conversation is always interesting too.
I think
But
that's a
I think,
good thing to end on.
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, I again
Do
apologize.
you feel resolved, Catherine? Do you
Um,
think we solved the problem?
no, I don't think we solved the problem, but I do think that we had some good conversation about it, and I do think it's an important one to continue having and to continue thinking about, and and potentially work on making some minor tweaks to it to make sure that things happen in a way that ultimately benefit our students because it's not about benefiting us. We've already had the benefit of whatever we've gotten and we should be working to make our students more successful than we are. And so that's always how I want to look at things.
Well, and I think to Eric's point, working to change the culture is probably a really powerful way to do that,
Yeah, absolutely. So
Yeah.
which is hard.
thanks for the discussion. I appreciate it.
Awesome.
Yay.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.